So think about this for a second. We've got this system of law that's supposed to cover the entire globe, right? Every single country. But where's the world police? Is there a global government passing these laws? A Supreme Court that every nation has to listen to? It's this huge fundamental paradox, and that's exactly what we're going to unpack. And really, it all just boils down to this one question. Can you actually call something a law if there's no one there to enforce it? No one with a badge and a stick to make sure people follow the rules? This is the core question that's been debated for centuries. For ages, the smartest legal minds and philosophers have been arguing about this. Is international law a real binding legal system that countries have to follow? Or is it just a list of nice suggestions? Moral guidelines that countries can just ignore when it's not convenient for them. What's wild is that this whole massive, complicated debate, it actually hinges on something incredibly simple. Your entire answer depends completely on how you define that one little word, law. All right, so let's start by hearing from the prosecution, the case against international law being real law. Our lead skeptic here is an influential 19th century jurist named John Austin, and boy, did he have a strict test. See, for Austin, for something to be true law, it had to check 3 boxes. It had to be a command, it had to come from a political superior, a sovereign, and, most importantly, it had to be backed up by the threat of punishment. If you can't enforce it, he said, it just ain't law. Simple as that. So, what happens when you measure international law against Austin's very tough checklist? Well, it fails. On every single point. Is there a single world sovereign giving orders? Nope. Is there a central authority issuing commands? Not really. And are there guaranteed fixed punishments for breaking the rules? Definitely not in the way Austin was talking about. And because it failed his test so spectacularly, Austin came to his now famous conclusion. International law, he said, isn't law at all. It's just positive international morality. Basically, a fancy way of saying it's just a set of shared opinions between nations with no real legal power behind it. And other jurists totally piled on. Thomas Holland had this wonderfully dramatic phrase for it, the vanishing point of jurisprudence. It's like he's saying, this is the exact spot where the whole concept of law just, poof, evaporates into thin air. To the skeptics, it was a system with absolutely no teeth. But of course, that is not the end of the story. Now let's hear from the defense. A whole other school of thought came along and said, hang on, maybe we need to stop getting hung up on these rigid academic definitions and just look at how this stuff actually works in the real world. Their counter-argument was all about the evidence. They said, look, do nations generally follow these rules? Yeah, most of the time they do. Does the system evolve over time through customs and past decisions, just like our laws at home? It sure does. And, this is the big one, the countries themselves act like these rules are legally binding. They recognize they're part of a global community that has a shared rulebook. And maybe the most brilliant point came from a jurist named Pitt Cobbett. He pointed out that people break domestic laws all the time, right? We speed, we jaywalk. But no one argues that traffic laws have suddenly stopped existing because someone got a speeding ticket. A law is still a law, even when someone breaks it. And, he argued, the exact same thing is true for international law. Okay, so we've heard from the prosecution and the defense. We've heard from the skeptics and the pragmatists. So, after all that, what's the modern verdict? Is it law or isn't it? The modern consensus is in, and the overwhelming view today is that yes, international law is law in the truest sense. Now, it might be a different species of law than the one we're used to in our own countries, but it is a legal system nonetheless. So how on earth does it function without that world police force? Well, it works because the states themselves accept its authority. And while there isn't a world jail to throw a country in, breaking the rules has very real consequences. We're talking about things like crippling economic sanctions, political retaliation, and maybe the most powerful tool of all, the loss of international goodwill and your reputation on the world stage. To really get our heads around this, we have to ask an even bigger question. Where does any law get its authority from? And when you boil it all down, it really comes from 2 major competing theories. So on one side, you've got the natural law folks. They argue that law comes from something higher, from reason, from justice, from a sense of universal morality that we all share. But on the other side, you've got the positivists. And they say no, law is simply whatever states agree that it is. It's built on treaties and long-standing customs. It's not about what's morally right, it's about what everyone has consented to. And this brings us right to the heart of that positivist view, a Latin principle called Pacta Sunt Servanda. All it means is agreements must be kept. It's this fundamental idea that the promises nations make to each other are the absolute bedrock of the whole legal system. It's the engine that makes every single treaty work. So here's the big takeaway. Even though it doesn't have a central enforcer, and even though its authority is built on this complex web of consent and custom, international law is way, way more than just a book of moral suggestions. It is it is functional, and it is a deeply influential legal system that quietly shapes our world every single day. But all of this leaves us with one final and pretty urgent question. If this entire global legal system is built on promises and the good faith of nations, what happens to the law when that goodwill starts to run out? That is the challenge that this system faces right now, today.